Welcome to On Edge with Sean Reilly, episode 4. Thank you for listening. If you're tuning in, audio, video, YouTube, podcasting platforms, it is my great honor and privilege to have one of my comedy idols on the show today, Scott Dikkers. And want to, if you're not familiar, he is the founder of The Onion, and I've met him in person, and he's been a great mentor to me in comedy. And I think that I'm so fascinated with the story of The Onion, and I'm sure you are too. And I hope you enjoy The Onion. And I think this is just a opportunity to learn more from Scott. And I'm just really excited he took the time to be here. So thank you, Scott.
You're welcome, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I don't even know where to begin. I mean, I think I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to talk about first, but I just loved, because I think the timeline of The Onion is so fascinating. But one thing I'd love to know more about is, like, in your mind, like, what was the biggest, the most challenging project you ever had to do while at The Onion?
Boy, there were so many of them. Like, just starting The Onion itself was hugely daunting. And I'm one of those people where, like, I get excited about something, so I dive in with both feet and I don't plan a lot. And it helps me because I don't ever realize just how impossible the task is until I'm, like, in the thick of it.
Right.
And I'm suffering. And then at that point, it's like, well, you're in this deep, you got to finish. And so starting up The Onion was like, you're signing up for a weekly humor publication. So The Onion was a print newspaper in the first 10, 20 years of its existence. It only became a website about, I think, 8 or 9 years in. And so in those early days, it was founded in 1988. It was a lot of, like, just late nights trying to come up with something funny to fill, you've got to fill like 8 broadsheet, size pieces of paper with comedy. Like, that's a lot of material. And there's not a lot of people there to help. Like, nobody's, like, getting paid, like, nobody's showing up. So at the end of the day, it's like the buck stops with me, and it's like I'm staying up till 3-4 in the morning, just, like, trying to come up with stuff. And then, like, photographs, like, we didn't have photographers or, like, graphics people. So I took a photo class, and I, like, went to a dark room, and I was, like, trying to figure out how to do, like, photo trickery, because The Onion would do, like, these photo collages and stuff. And Photoshop wasn't really a thing then. It didn't even have layers at that time.
Wow.
When Photoshop first came out. So you had to do the option erase tool if you wanted to do any kind of, like, superimposing of one person's face on a different photo, for example, stuff like that. And so that was really daunting and really tough. And a lot of the people involved, again, all working for free. They're young, everybody's in their early 20s. And so their, like, tempers ran high, and there's a lot of drama. And it was just really challenging and difficult. So that was probably the worst. Over the years, like, another one was our first book, Our Dumb Century, which was an incredible amount of work. And it was, like, basically 2 years of my time with no vacation, no time off, and working roughly 14-hour days to put together that book, because it was just so much copy. Like, the whole thing then was we wanted to see how many jokes per square inch we could cram into that book. And it was a ton of work, just, like, assigning the ideas for everybody, coming up with ideas myself, vetting those ideas, and then executing on them, trying to figure out the best way to escalate a certain joke idea, and then getting the graphics and doing all the layouts, aging the papers. It was, the book is a look back at the 20th century through the pages of The Onion, which are all fake front pages, obviously, since The Onion wasn't around. Mm-hmm. And it was a ton of work, but it was hugely rewarding and hugely fun. And it's one of the things I'm most proud of, probably, is our first book.
Yeah. And I mean, it made the New York Times bestseller, right?
Yeah. It debuted at #1 on Amazon and New York Times.
That's incredible. Yeah. I mean, that must have been
pretty surprising.
Cathartic feeling.
Back then, this is 1999. There weren't many other, like, humor websites. The Onion was the first one, and there weren't too many by then. And it was one of the few places where you could go to, like, read comedy online. And so it just made sense that it was such a big hit straight away.
Yeah, that was actually the next question I was going to ask is, like, when you decide, like, could you maybe walk through the thought process of moving from print newspaper to digital content? And was that sort of just a no-brainer for you, or was that were there risks that you were concerned about in moving to digital?
Yeah, the risk was it was going to cost us $400. So we had to pay an internet service provider $400. And I had a lot of tough conversations with my business partner who was like, $400, jeez, what is this, internet? Like, what is that? Is anybody ever going to see it? What's the point? And so the Onion, we were always trying to expand. Like, I wanted the Onion to be everywhere. We had already done a radio news show, which we were syndicating around to radio stations. We did we did a comedy CD. We did a TV pilot. We were doing the newspaper. We were working on the book. And so it just, one of our designers, like one of our tech guys, basically said, hey, there's this new thing called websites where you can like put your stuff on the computer and people can see it anywhere. And I was thinking, well, great. That's just another avenue to distribute what we're already doing. So in that way, it was a no-brainer because it was just, we're producing all this free content for the paper anyway. Let's just put it on the internet, put it on a website. And they designed it to look much like the newspaper. And we would just dump our stuff on there every week. We wouldn't think anything more about it. Just dump it on there and not think about it. But, suddenly as the internet grew, like our audience, our potential audience anyway, just ballooned to like, the entire world. And suddenly we're getting written up all over. Again, we were the first humor website, so there was nothing else like it online. Later you would start seeing sites that would have like jokes, or like funny puns, like, just lists of stupid stuff like that. But there was no like dedicated like Spy Magazine didn't go online. Mad Magazine didn't go online. Like nobody was going online. Everybody was thinking, it's a fad, or I don't know what they were thinking, but we were the first out of the gate and kind of cornered that market really quickly.
Yeah. I mean, that's incredible. And I think that,
it's incredibly lucky. It really was lucky timing right there.
Well, hey, it's partly luck and partly, business acumen, right? Being able to identify the opportunity.
Yeah.
And so kind of moving forward through the timeline, it was when you started to see the, I guess there was the inflection point of when the audience sort of, or from where I guess the digital audience was larger than the newsprint audience. Was that, when was that? What do you remember the rough?
That was in the mid 2000s, I would say. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we were still just dumping everything we did on print on the website. We weren't doing anything special for the website. We didn't even have social media. Like we didn't do anything that was like web 2.0 or web savvy, literally until about 20, I want to say 08 or 09 is when we first started really, let's get a Twitter account. Let's get on Facebook and, put our stuff out that way. We just thought people would come to our website, but obviously the trend was going to be that people would share stuff and they would come to us through Facebook, or they may not even ever come to our website. They would just see us on Facebook and that would be it. And for me anyway, the context of the comedy was so critical. Like you had to see that it looked like a fake news website, and you had to see the picture and the headline. Like I want to control the reader experience as much as possible because that's how you make sure that the stuff is working. And the social media stuff always bothered me because it was their context and like, who knows how it's going to be perceived. That ended up being a little bit of a problem when people started believing Onion stories were true because they weren't seeing it in the whole context of this silly parody newspaper. They were seeing each story separate. And if the story wasn't sufficiently goofy or crazy and actually believable, then people would believe it. And I always thought of that as kind of an unfortunate mistake. Like it behooves us, the creators, to come up with ideas that are so funny that they're immediately recognizable as funny and not confusing, into confusing people into thinking they're real. I would never want comedy to be that subtle.
That's fascinating. Wow, I have so many questions. Because I've debated this amongst a lot of my friends that have studied. I consider myself a student of comedy. Just try to learn as much as possible about it and make our own theories about comedy. I do on the point of creating comedy that's obviously funny. Like if you just read the headline and that's enough, maybe the headline and the image is enough to indicate that that alone should be funny. I think that there's certainly been the articles that have been produced by the Onion that are more I guess not maybe, or there's a dark side, I think, to satire.
Sure.
And I think that like one of the ones that comes to mind is my two favorite ones that I think are actually part of bigger conversations around digital content and satire in general. The first one was the Only Nation. I don't know it by heart. The school shooter one.
Oh,
Only
yeah.
Nation. I forgot the exact headline.
No way.
No way to prevent this,
No way
says
to prevent
Only
this,
Nation.
says Only Nation, where this regularly happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like, I was just going to say, I think that that's funny, but there's also such a dark, haunting feeling when you read that headline.
Yeah. Well, all satire should have really interesting subtext, an interesting point that you're making about the human condition or something that's wrong with society. And you should be pointing that out and doing it in a funny way. So, when it's a school shooting and a bunch of kids get killed, like it is really hard to be funny about that. So the most you can do is point out irony and hypocrisy and then do the reference humor of like repeating that same joke over and over. So it's like painfully being beaten into people's heads that we're avoiding the obvious solution. So
right.
that was actually we came up with that one around 2012. And before that, every school shooting, we'd have to come up with a new headline, and it was brutal. Like, how do you come up with something funny? So that was like a lifesaver. Okay, now great. We can just run that same headline and just punch in the new details. Because it's like, every week there's another one. I mean, technically every day there's a mass shooting in America, but they're so common they don't even get reported on anymore.
Yeah. God, I mean, there's so many, like, I mean, that's the Onion, right? That headline below, though, that article is so there's so many levels to it, I think. I mean, there's levels to a lot. There's levels to comedy, but like that article specifically, the whole idea of it coming back and reemerging and you not having to really change much about it when you republish it is part of the whole message.
Part of the joke. Yeah. Part of the entertainment, part of the joke, and part of the subtextual message. Exactly. Mm-hmm. But, the struggle with the Onion and any satire really is you don't want to be too preachy, because a lot of writers want to preach and they have something they want to say. And it takes a lot of discipline to couch whatever they want to say into something amusing and funny, and sometimes even maybe seemingly dumb or silly. But it's really important, because otherwise it doesn't work. Otherwise you're just writing editorials. You're not doing comedy at that point.
Absolutely. And that actually other thing I always wondered about was how do you on a team, in a writer's room, on a team, or really any team, how do you come to a thoughtful, or find a middle ground in terms of the political message, or maybe not political, but in terms of like, I guess when two people disagree on the subtext of an article, for example, how do you go about solving that issue?
Well, I wrote a whole book about like how to run a writer's room and how to behave in a writer's room. It's book 3 of my How to Write Funny series, called How to Write Funniest. And the way I would do it is, so a lot of writers' rooms would have like the head writer who would sort of be the arbiter of all these discussions and so forth. And I think it's really important for that leader to be like a benevolent dictator. So at some point, arguments are counterproductive, and the leader just needs to step in and say, okay, we have argument A, argument B, we're going with B, end of discussion, and just make a decision and go with it. In comedy, that's important because there needs to be a consistent comedic vision. And ultimately, the leader of that writer's room is the person whose vision is the one being communicated. So there's no point in having a lot of elaborate argument or discussion when the leader can just chime in and say, okay, that's enough, we're going this way. Now, obviously, a good leader is going to listen to the team and listen to the opinions and not unreasonably disagree with them.
Right.
Otherwise, like, why are they on the team? They're on the team because they generally align with the the mindset of the leader.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And kind of moving back to one thing I was wondering about in terms, just back to the timeline of the Onion. You know, you mentioned that you had to, or you were also were on social media. You know, the Onion has a Twitter, they have a Facebook page. I think that it's really frustrating to me to see the way that social media platforms have responded in my opinion, not cooperated with satire. And
yeah, that's been really unfortunate. And a lot of people are upset that those major social media platforms have basically, taken over comedy distribution. And so it's harder to make money at it because of them. So yeah, it's really a problem. Like they've become so big so fast and the world has changed so quickly. It's like people don't even know how to manage it. I think that they need to be publicly owned. They need to be publicly owned utilities. I think it's really damaging that they are privately owned and they're there for profit. I just don't think that helps anybody except Mark Zuckerberg. Like why, that's so silly. Like we can do that on a matter of principle. Like if we just have like a dogmatic view of capitalism and say, well, that's the way it's set up. That's the way it has to work. No, fuck that. We need to just organize it so it's smart. And the way social media is now, they are utilities. We all kind of need them for business and work and et cetera. They're even more valuable than like our phones used to be, or, internet service itself. So yeah, just make them a utility. Like it's silly. Why does Mark Zuckerberg need $200 billion?
Yeah, to buy Hawaii.
It's insanity. It's to buy the forbidden island. It's just madness.
Yeah, I mean and I think that comedy is only one industry that has been thwarted or the value has been extracted basically.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean news media in general.
Oh yeah,
has
big
been
one. And now they have to be the arbiters, which is, it's just getting really murky at this point.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I think a lot about this question because I think I guess from a political philosophy point of view, I do think that regulated capitalism. I guess I'm biased. I mean, like that's the system I grew up in. So of course, I always think like, well, I'm biased to think that that's the right system because I grew up in it. But I guess the question is always how much regulation and in what weight capacity do we want to have regulation in different industries? And
that's the real trick, because obviously it's always regulated and there's no such thing as free markets. The only free market capitalism is in these really horrible countries like Iraq or Chile under the Pinochet dictatorship. You don't want that. Like then you've got like 4 people owning everything and everybody else is basically living in the slums.
Yeah.
So yeah, you need a little bit of regulation, but then getting wise people to regulate it in a way that makes sense is absolutely the trickiest part. And obviously our politics here in this country is totally owned by corporate interests. That all the lawmakers are totally in the pocket of corporations because that's where they get all their money. And so the corporate interests are being served beautifully, but the public's interest is totally ignored.
Yeah, it's when Citizens United. I mean, I think that was sort of the turning point.
Baffling, yeah, just baffling. Like it's so astonishing how stupid human beings can be sometimes when they think that they have it all figured out and they have rules. They can't step back and say, okay, wait, let's just think for a second here. No, they're dogmatic and they can get into some really weird rabbit holes, like thinking that corporations are people and Citizens United. It's just absolute madness. And I think if humanity survives beyond the next 10 years, we're going to look back and say, what were they thinking? Like, it's going to be crazy. We're going to look back at it just like we look back now on slavery or burning witches or any of the stupid stuff from the past. People are going to be like, what in the hell are they thinking?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it was like I think a lot of problems that are discussed, political issues that are discussed these days, and this might be my own dogma, but I think they're all symptoms of Citizens United. I think
I agree.
Perhaps that's a simplification of the problems, but I think that it's clear. I think I sort of clearly a lot of it stemming from Citizens United.
Yeah, well, the bribing of political, like lawmakers, was a problem before Citizens United, and after it just became so brazen. Like it's like off the charts now, since you can give unlimited dark money to political candidates. They're just they're bought and paid for by the richest people in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very sad. This interview got real dark and
Yeah.
sad. Really.
Yeah. Well, I have a funny question.
Great.
To cheer you up, to lift the mood. Let's see. It was okay. Here's one from one of my listeners here. What type of onion is the onion?
That's a really good question. We never defined that. We never, like in the very beginning, like, the onion dingbat, that image of the green onion logo that we have.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that started out, one of the guys who founded it, Chris Johnson, drew an onion by hand, and it was shaped very similar to that onion, but it was just with a ballpoint pen, and we cut it out and we put it at the end of every article. So it was like the little stamp at the end of a piece.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had a designer like clean up the lines a little bit and make it, green, and put it on the next to the title on the masthead and stuff. But nobody ever stopped to think, wait, is that a green onion? Is that a red onion? Is that a white onion? Like, nobody ever figured it out. So I never thought about it. I don't care. It's the onion newspaper is what it is.
So it's another layer. You'll never know. It's a mystery.
You'll never know. No.
That's yeah. So I guess it all comes back to the free markets. On the subject of free markets, I'm wondering what, after, with your incredible career in comedy, I think that or for any artist out there, there's the classic balance, or if you want to call it a balance, of commercial art and art as art to put out in the world. And
that a lot.
I'm wondering how you, through with the onion, how were there ever instances where you had to think about your obviously, the art, in my mind, if you have strong artistic integrity in what you're creating, it will actually lead to the commercial art being more profitable in general. That's just my own theory. It hasn't been tested, but like from your experience with the onion, were those ever at odds, the commercial aspect of the onion and the artistic integrity?
No, not really. Because I think I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on your theory. I think that somebody with total integrity who's an artist might be doing art that is incredibly honest and deep, and they have total integrity with it. They're not selling out at all, but it might be total crap. Like nobody is interested in that, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
So with the onion, with comedy, you can't do that. Comedy requires an audience to be laughing at it. So the only way it's going to succeed financially is if people like it. So like, you can have a subjective idea that you think is funny, and if you put it out there and nobody else likes it, it's not funny. Like, you lose, and you don't make money if you put that out there consistently. So my thought was always that what the onion is doing is not art, it's entertainment. And so I was never there, nor did I encourage any of the other writers or anybody at the onion to think of it as a vehicle for their artistic expression. That's not what it's about. It's an entertainment medium. We're here to entertain. We're here to come up with funny things that make people laugh. And that's about as transactional interaction as you could possibly have. People like it, they laugh, they support you, So that's how I always thought about it. Never really had to make any compromises, because it was always about, well, the more we can serve the audience, the better we're going to do financially.
I see that makes sense. And I guess as a result of that, if you want to conserve the audience and grow the audience, well, how do you do that? You make great comedy.
Exactly.
So it kind of it sounds like it all kind of just synchronizes.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful how that works. It's like, if you're Steven Spielberg and you want to make movies that really entertain people, you're going to do well.
Hmm.
If you're Jim Jarmusch and you want to make weird artistic films that people are confused by, you're not going to be making as much money as Steven Spielberg. It's just the natural rule of the universe.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's uh I think it's an interesting way to look at it, because I think that it's I totally understand that. I think that it's hard for me to separate entertainment from art.
Interesting. Yeah,
Um,
for me, it's very easy because to me, art is you don't care about the audience. You're just there to express what you want to express. You don't have to make it accessible. You don't have to have a big following. So, but I should add this, like for The Onion, like my thing was I just wanted it to be funny and I wanted the maximum number of people to find it funny. But I didn't care if that ever made money. It just is, it's a matter of fact that if you do entertain the maximum number of people, you're probably going to make a lot of money.
mhm,
So my focus was always on the quality of the content. And for the first 10 years, The Onion didn't make any money. All it was doing was building fans. And so we didn't even realize at that time that, well, that's something that's really valuable.
mhm.
Coming out of the gate, once you have a lot of employees and you actually have to be a serious business, to have that loyal fan base that's really big is vital. Like, how can you survive unless you have that? So, yeah, to me, they're very different, art and entertainment. And
Yeah.
now I'll say this: I think some entertainment can be so expertly crafted that it's like, oh my God, that's a work of art. Great, icing on the cake. But I never would go out to purposefully do art and say, well, I have this important thing that I want to, this, important message or idea or theme that I want to communicate through my art. And damn the public, I don't care if they get it or not. I'm going to put it out there. That's how I see art. And I've never been a fan of fine art. I think it's very pretentious and highbrow. I'm interested in low art. Like, I want something that's going to appeal to the vast majority of people.
Yeah, that's yeah, because I know you, and you talk about that in your books as well. I think that I mean it's a very compelling argument, because I for basically my entire life before I really started to try to do comedy, uh, and make try to build a career out of this, I always thought of it as art. But after trying to create digital content in my apartment for 6 months, I'm like, no, I think Scott's right.
It's a business. Yeah. It's
So but the experience, the world doesn't lie to you when you put it out there.
No, it really doesn't. That's the beautiful thing.
Yeah. I and kind of like just go back to the timeline. I know. So I've been following, like, I don't know if you know this, but before I was doing comedy, I was really interested in finance, the financial industry. I actually worked for about a year in investment banking in the Silicon Valley. But I was following the track of The Onion, and lately it's gone through a lot of different, like, merger, or got acquired, and then, like, I think it was Univision, right? And then they sold it to a private equity firm,
Yeah,
which
it's
I
just
think
like
is,
a bunch of money people.
yeah,
Sad.
exactly. And I was just wondering, like, was that when it was sold to Univision, was that like a did they get The Onion? Did all those men in suits,
No,
did
I
they
don't
get
think
The
so.
Onion?
No, so when I finally sold out my ownership in the Onion, it was around 2008 or 9. I sold a big chunk earlier than that too, around 2001, and I sold it to a guy who was like this billionaire investor who just was a really nice old guy whose son loved The Onion, and that made sense. Like, I was in touch with him, could talk to him, and he just let us do whatever we wanted. Like, we needed a little infusion of capital, so we decided, okay, it's time to sell.
Mm-hmm.
And so uh, once he sold it to Univision, then things got weird because now it's a big company, and they're trying to like clump The Onion in with all their other websites. And now with this Capital Group, I don't know what the hell's going on, but I do feel like a lot of times the suits, the money men, the bean counters really have no idea what they have because they don't understand the concept of the golden goose versus the golden eggs. And I think that's really critical. They're happy to chop off parts of the golden goose and sell it. And they don't see a problem with that. And I'm like, no, 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 idiots. Let the goose lay the eggs, sell the eggs. They just don't get it. So they're like, tarnishing the Onion's goodwill by having annoying pop-up ads, for example. That's cutting off part of the golden goose. Or screwing with the Onion's context, where you're there have been so many weird, like, tone deaf decisions. Like, even just the sale to Univision in itself is like weird. Like, people heard that and they're like, what? Like, don't sell it to a company that gives you that reaction. Everything the Onion does should be funny. So if you sold it to Comedy Central, that would make sense. People would be like, oh, cool. It makes
Mhm.
total sense. But Univision, like, what? And now this Capital Group, like, again, I don't know what they're doing. But I remember one time I was the editor and I was sitting in the office, and one of my new business partners was having a meeting in one of the big meeting rooms, and all these older guys in blazers and polo shirts tucked in were like coming into this meeting, and I'm like, who are those guys? And he's like, oh, that's our board of directors. I'm like, what? Who? What do they know about anything? Like, there was no editorial person on the board of directors.
Oh my
They were all
God.
just a bunch of dumb business people who are only interested in making money. Like, the whole concept is crazy.
They're from Wharton. They're the subject of your satire a lot of the times.
Exactly.
They're the guys that sit back in the chair that you're making fun of, that point at.
Absolutely. So they don't get it. They're going to make bad decisions. And it was mystifying to me that anyone would ever give a board like that any kind of decision-making power over what was happening at the Onion. It was baffling to me.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Because I worked in that industry for a while, and just like, I engaged with a lot of like boards of directors and stuff. And like, it's just, there's so many bullshitters.
Yeah, no,
so many bullshitters.
The world, people who are confident but incompetent make the world go around. That's my sincerest belief. They have nothing but confidence. So like these guys in the blazers and the polo shirts that are tucked in, they're coming in saying, I know what to do. I've got all the best decisions, because they're basically confident, blustery white men, almost all of them, but they don't know shit. Like, they don't know anything. They're totally incompetent. And I remember thinking that I was seeing proof of my theory, and the whole world was seeing it as well, when George W. Bush won the presidency. Because here was a guy who had nothing but confidence. The best quote about him was, I forget who said it. He was born on third base and thought he hit a triple. So he's got nothing but confidence. He thinks, I'm a leader. I went to a good school and I come from a great family. Totally incompetent. Like, totally screwed up the government, screwed up the country. Everybody hated him at the end of his term. It's like 20% approval rating.
Yeah.
Because he invaded the wrong country and like just constantly making stupid decisions. And I'm realizing, like, that's the whole world. That's everybody. And as humans, we don't really even get it when it's happening. We see somebody who's tall and wears a nice suit, and we're like, oh, they must know what they're doing. But they don't. They're like idiots. They're all complete idiots. Sometimes it's the more unassuming people with their heads down, who don't talk a lot, who are the most competent. And I always tried to find those people to write for The Onion. Like, it never impressed me when somebody had a lot of comedy experience and they're like a go-getter and they're sending me a lot of like resumes and saying, hey, I'd love to work for your company. It's like, nah, not interested. Like, anybody who's that like confident, I don't know, like, oftentimes that doesn't go with competence,
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think that's really interesting. That absolutely. I think, and sad, I guess that kind of segues into the one other thing I was wondering about at the Onion, which was, or maybe just from your perspective, from your experience, how do you identify someone, or what do you think of the idea of like ego, and as a writer, or just as a team member, and like how do you identify someone with too much ego? And like, because I've definitely, I think we've all met people with a lot of ego. And
no, that's a great question. On a team, I always want as little ego as possible. And as the leader of a team of writers, my job is to eliminate ego, eliminate emotional struggle, problem, just keep things very professional. And so when it comes to evaluating jokes, which is what a writer's room meeting is all about, it's all about evaluating the joke on its merits and not considering at all the feelings of the people who wrote it. Like a lot of comedy, unfortunately, is produced with the feelings of the creator being taken into consideration. And that's so wrong,
Hmm.
because the end audience doesn't know who wrote it, doesn't care. They don't care about their feelings. All they care about is it funny. So at The Onion, we take the names off of all the jokes. So when we're reading jokes at the meeting, nobody knew who wrote what. And I didn't care if the janitor wrote the funniest joke that week. It was going on the front page because it's the funniest joke. And so writers who understand that and get that and are on board with that was critical. Like anybody who had too much of an ego or wanted their name on their work or whatever, that they were just out. They were out. Like that's just not anything I'm interested in.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you can smell somebody with too much ego right away. Like people with too much ego are insecure and um, constantly bringing it back to themselves. Donald Trump, great example. Like
Yeah.
too much ego. Like he's just he's a thin-skinned child with absolutely no self-esteem.
Yeah. Well, hey, 2 weeks or whatever, however long it is, hopefully the world will change.
Yeah, we'll all be
But
laughing when he wins.
yeah, I'll be. Yeah, I'm out here in LA, so I'll be on the street probably.
Yeah, it's going to be it's crazy times we live in. It's going to be crazy no matter what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually, so with with the increasing polarization, politically, socially, have you? How does I mean, obviously, satire has a big role in that. Do you think that satire unifies people, or do you think it's more about exposing, or I think it's about exposing the truth?
Yeah, it is. It
And
is.
how
And
does
I do
that connect to polarization?
yeah, so I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think that the polarization that we see in society is very much manufactured. I think the real polar opposites politically in America, or really in any country, are between the very, very rich and everybody else. And it's always like the 1% against the 99%. That's the real polarization. So if you look at any poll in America, any public opinion poll, the 99% want certain things. We want um, free healthcare. Um, we don't want the government to be intruding into our lives. We want some sort of guaranteed income, whether that be Social Security or a job or whatever. Like those are like hitting 80-ish% in terms of public approval in America. If you look at any poll, why doesn't Congress pass any of that? Because they're owned by the 1%. So the 1% want deregulation. They don't want to give people things for free. They want to support the military. So the whole left right polarization is manufactured by the 1% to blind us to the real polarization, which is between the 1% and the 99%. So I don't buy any of that. Like most of the people on the right, and in this day and age, basically we're talking about complete idiots who think that Donald Trump is a god. Like that's the majority of the right wing in this country at this point. Those people, I'm sorry, they're just dupes who are totally buying the propaganda of the 1% because they're being told that um, the left, which doesn't even exist, like the establishment Democratic Party is not left at all. They're just as corporate as the Republican Party.
Oh yeah.
And they don't want you to have any of the good stuff either. But for some reason, these people, they're not engaged in politics. They're uninformed. They don't understand what's going on. They're basically just victims of a cult of personality. So all of the propaganda from the establishment and from, the media is all corporate owned. It's all owned by that 1%. So the messages that most people are getting are furthering this fiction that there's this fight between left and right and that it's somehow equal. It's crazy. The
Yeah.
left and right in this country are like, here's the political spectrum. They're like right here, like barely left of center, barely right of center. Whereas the 1% is way over here on the right, totally fascist. Like they just want to own everything and fuck you. And then on the far left, and I wouldn't even go as far left as like communism, because I think that's like kind of just an outmoded uh, way to organize a country that nobody believes in this day and age. But it's definitely like more socialist, and it's like social democracy where people are taken care of. They have social welfare, they have daycare, they have school, like a lot of the Northern European countries have. And that's what most Americans want, but we're never going to get it because in this country, the corporations own so much. They even own the conversation and they dictate the terms of the conversation. So satire's role in all that is to point that out. And so the best satire does that. And you'll notice a lot of satire comes across very anti-right wing. It's obvious why that is. Like I'm talking about Colbert or The Onion or, anybody. Like it's almost
Most
impossible to
comedy,
find a
South.
right-wing satirist because the right is basically a dupe of the 1%. That's what the right is. Their whole job is to just service the 1%, give the 1% whatever they want and screw everybody else. But comedians and satirists are smart and they have to appeal to the 99% in order to succeed at all. And they know where the 99% stand. The 99% are decent, they're humanitarian, they want social welfare, and they don't like authority figures who are foot servants to the 1%. And so that's the kind of jokes that they're going to put out there. And those are the kind of jokes that get laughs because that's what people think. That's what people want.
Yeah, very well said. I mean, I think I've like I have always thought that or I totally agree with that, and I think that a big part of that conversation is obviously when you mention classism, everyone what else is mentioned is usually socioeconomics and also race.
Right.
And I think that it's always hard to I think it's challenging to make a definitive statement about what the priority should be. Or I personally, this is my total blunt opinion. I think that classism is sort of I think obviously racism exists and it's very, very real. I think that classism is also extremely real, and that it's not given the credit, or in a bad way, that it deserves in the conversation.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. We're all talking about racism and not classism, even though like they're kind of part of the same problem. They're just another way to divide us and prevent us from looking at the real cause of the problems, which is the 1%. And so one of the games that they play on the right is, and this never works in satire, is to blame the victim or blame a disenfranchised minority group that has zero power, like, Black people, Mexicans, immigrants, things like that. The far right has had a lot of success for a long time fermenting fear of these disenfranchised groups, or women, also ferment fear of these groups to further their agenda, to continue to prop up the 1%. And that's where you get these cultural wedge issues. It's really sad. It's just really horrible. I think the older I get, the more jaded and disillusioned I get in the ability of human beings to ever organize themselves in any fair or responsible way. That's where we're at,
Yeah, no, I already feel that coming on as well. I often think about the United States in its position in the world's economy in the world, and I always think about in terms of I have asked myself the same question, how should humans organize themselves? And I always go back and forth between would the United States ever be as successful as it is if not for taking advantage of all of these other countries that have different models of organization that are that we take advantage of?
Yeah, so that's a really powerful argument. Like if you look at Great Britain during the time when it was the world power, it was the number one world power, is when it produced a lot of the great culture of Western civilization. You look at Dickens or anything. Like you couldn't have had Dickens if you hadn't had the subjugation of the subcontinent. They raped and ravaged less developed countries and people in order to prop themselves up and support this flourishing culture. So we do the same thing. Like that it's obviously one of the benefits of being, and America is, we're basically the 1% of the world, you know,
Yeah.
and one of the things we benefit from being the 1% is that we can have a flourishing culture. And it's why America still has, our culture is still the number one cultural export in the world, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like I look at the example of like IKEA or Lego, you know, two companies that come from these Northern European countries that aren't as cutthroat capitalist as America is. And that's probably what we'd be looking at. Like we wouldn't have Facebook, but we'd have Lego. You know, we're like,
The Lego of social media. We'd have a better version.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I'm very cynical about it. I also I have a lot of friends because I studied aerospace engineering. A lot of friends that are working in the defense industry, and that is just a disaster.
Yeah,
it is a disaster.
You know, Eisenhower would flip over in his grave if he knew what was happening. Like his worst fears have come true as far as the military-industrial complex.
It's crony. It's the worst. It's crony capitalism. It's the worst of both worlds.
And Biden says he's going to increase the military budget if he gets in. Like
right.
what? It's absolute madness.
Yeah. So it's like increase it a little bit or increase it by like a lot. And it's like, yeah.
It needs to be cut in like, you know, cut down by like literally 90%. Like then it'll be sane.
Yeah.
Like right now it's just obscene how much money we spend on defense, and for what? Like we're not fighting wars anymore. It's like insanity. Where is this money going to? I don't get it. And most Americans don't want that. They don't want us to be like messing around in all these countries, just fucking things up and like trying to orchestrate coups in Bolivia so they can get their oil. Like what? Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that.
Yeah, it's insane to me. I mean, yeah, totally it's yeah, there's a yeah, I just think it's what do you think of because I've been following, like I also follow the economy a lot. There's this argument, I think, that or there's this argument that, or there's this challenge, there's this kind of dichotomy of like, do we save jobs by, I mean, I hate corporate bailouts. I hate them. And one thing that I think that the airline, like the airline industry, like United Airlines, they'll say we need money from the government, taxpayer dollars, so that we can save jobs. Because, and I hate that message because what they're doing is they're holding the jobs hostage. So my reaction to that is, well, let's kill the fucking, let the jobs die. That's like the capitalist inside of me says that. But then I say, well, I don't want those people to be unemployed. But if we had good social welfare programs, I wouldn't be as bad. I wouldn't mind as much for them losing their jobs if it didn't mean they'd be homeless and literally die.
Yeah, and a lot of those corporations, they always say that, but then when they get the money, they fire the workers anyway, and they just hold
pay
the
themselves.
Stock. They do the stock buyback or whatever.
Yeah.
So what FDR did was smart. Like that's what we need to do. It's like, and I don't know why they didn't do this. Well, I guess I know why, because they're in the pocket of corporations. They need to give the stimulus to the people. Like in other civilized countries, they gave the citizens like several $1,000s a month during the pandemic to incentivize them staying at home, not going to work. Made total sense. And then you'd have a flourishing economy because you've got people with money. And what are people with money going to do? They're going to go out and they're going to spend it. Then you can have businesses that are on a solid foundation. But if you're just artificially pumping up businesses by giving them a bunch of money, but the customers don't have any money, like that's crazy. I don't understand why they did that. Well, like I said, I do, but it's maddening to watch it happen when the solution is so obvious.
I feel the same way. I knew they were going to do stock buybacks because the CFOs, they sit down and they're like, well, that's what's going to maximize our stock price.
Yep.
And
that's
you know,
their goal.
It's I saw it's incredible to me. But anyway, yeah, I guess keep jumping over. It is a weird time we live in. I do want to ask about going back to one of the projects that I wish I actually had never saw it live, but the Onion Sports Dome. I'd love to hear that story and sort of the process for like selling it, pitching it, and then you know what? Because I know unfortunately it did get canceled along with I think Norm Macdonald's sports was also canceled around the same time.
Yeah, so I have very little involvement in that because I'm not a sporto, and
Oh,
so there
okay.
were a couple of people on the Onion staff who were interested in sports, and so we started doing Onion Sports in around the year 2005 or so, and then we started doing the Onion web video, which we called ONN, and we sold that to IFC. We sold a TV show, and then Comedy Central bought Sports Dome because one of the writers on ONN was a sports fan and sort of partnered with John Cruson, who was doing Onion Sports, and so we had enough of a sports, you know, subgroup like within the Onion
Hmm.
that we felt like that could work. And I was telling my friend Ben Carlin, who used to work at the Onion, he was my assistant editor for a long time. He ran the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and he co-created the Colbert Show.
Wow.
And he tried to do a sports show, and I told him that we were doing this, and he was like, impossible. You can't do a comedy sports show. It won't work. And I'm like, why not? And he said, because sports is already kind of trying to be funny, like the way they cover sports, the way they talk about sports, they're trying to be amusing. And I knew from doing the Onion web videos and the Onion itself that the straight man of the news voice, of the AP voice, is critical. Like you need that straight man in order for the funny to work.
Hmm.
And I get that with sports, like it's already light entertainment. Like where's the straight man? You know, how do you turn that into humor? So they tried. Again, I wasn't involved, but so I don't know much about the pitching or how that went with Sports Dome.
Mm.
But I know that because of the Onion web video series, ONN, we were getting flooded with TV show offers. Like agents were just beating down our doors, like wanting us to do TV shows. And we just kept saying, no, we want to just keep doing the web videos to like really find our voice. And, you know, we did that for like 2 or 3 years. And then we kind of were like, okay, fine, we'll do a TV show. And Comedy Central wanted to do that. And IFC bought the what was essentially strung together web video clips that we had done with the Onion News Network. And I wasn't involved in either. I actually left the Onion right before. I probably would have held out more doing TV. I don't think we were quite ready. I think they chomped at the bit a little bit too much on those shows.
Yeah, that's actually that reminded me of another question. I think that's really interesting because like when you get ONN, then you get this hyper growth. I mean, those videos, I mean, they're so bingeable. These videos are just like, I mean, I'm biased because I'm a super fan, right? But like, I think I mean, you look at the view counts, right? Millions of views.
Oh, I know.
Like,
and I appreciate that. We worked so hard on making those funny, and we really wanted to focus on that.
And you did VO on a lot of them, right? I think I hear your voice.
I did a lot, yeah. So that trying to sell those as TV shows too soon was like selling the golden goose. You know, I wanted to anyway, build it up bigger and keep doing it. The problem is it was really expensive. Like, and it's one of the reasons why our owner eventually had to sell to Univision, was because some of this stuff was just so expensive. Like we were spending 25 grand on a 3-minute video clip for the Onion's website, which is insanity. Like you'd be lucky to sell an ad for that for $500. So we just made a huge investment. We probably spent $2 million on those web videos.
Wow.
But, you know,
the production value was so high though. It was, I mean, the quality, it was just, you can't beat it.
No, I appreciate that. It was all part of the plan. We wanted it to look like a real, news network.
The graphics, I mean, the acting, every single aspect of it. The little headlines below, were those ones that I'm curious. So the headlines that run across the bottom of ONN, are those ones that like are those also on the website, or
no? They were.
Or were those
other
specifically?
Headlines. We had a whole other staff that we put together to do the videos.
Oh,
that wasn't the same as the newspaper staff. Brought in new people, put a whole group together, and they would come up with ideas for videos, and they wrote them in headline form. So any idea that didn't get all the way to a video, we would just throw up on the crawl because we had so many of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God, the anteater one, that was one of my favorites.
What was that anteater one? I can't remember, but I remember.
It was a man that returns from 10-year. Man writes definitive guide on anteaters doesn't want to talk about. Doesn't want.
No, I remember that. Yeah.
God,
It's fun stuff.
like that. I mean, so ONN, right? So this is another question. You just reminded me of a question I wanted to ask, which was when you had this hyper growth with the ONN, right? And you're saying no to all these opportunities. How do you say no to those? Like, how do you decide what you're going to say no to, and what you're? I mean, I assume you say no a lot more, much more often than you say yes. But how do you make that decision?
Saying no is the most powerful thing you can do in the entertainment business, because most people don't say no. They say yes, because especially when they're being offered a TV show. So when you say no, they just want you more. And so how I could do it was because I knew that we were selling the golden goose, and I knew that was a mistake. We wanted to be selling golden eggs. So I wanted to make sure that our ONN videos were established and we had a smooth running operation. Everything was good. And then we put our brain power to work creating like the best possible TV show idea we could. And that's where I think the problem was. What the idea they sold was, well, let's just string together a bunch of these web videos. That's not how you do a TV show. A TV show should be 20 minutes and it should make sense. It should have a beginning, middle, and end. It should have characters that you care to come back and see every week. So they missed a lot of really important, like every medium has different rules. And so whenever we would take the Onion from one medium to another medium, we'd always very carefully consider the rules of the new medium. Like when we're going from print to radio, it's totally different rules. It's like a different beast. We didn't figure out the web rules until, like I said, about 2008 or so. Rules of a book, also different. We did our first book. We knew that was different. There it was like the density of the material. You want to pack it with a lot of jokes because that's where your most literate people are going to be, your audience. Video, like that's your lowest common denominator. That's, even idiots who don't read are going to watch your videos.
Yeah.
So those have to be really accessible, kind of hit on the head funny,
Yeah. I think the what's so incredible, I think, is like the learning curve for each of these mediums is so steep.
Yeah,
and they're and although they're all, I think, mediums of they're all content ways to distribute content. So I think there are some similarities between all of these different mediums that you just described. Absolutely. But were there how do you balance like not because I mean the quality is just it's incredible. How do you balance that with like being on a timeline and like maybe could you speak to an instance of where you're working on something, maybe it's an article, maybe it's a video, and you're watching it or you're looking at it and you have this thought, you're just like, it's not there yet. How do you balance that against a deadline?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the compliment. I would just pull the video. If I didn't think it was ready, we would just pull it. We would only put a video out if we thought it was really funny. And so at that time, when we were starting up ONN, I was very thinly spread. So I was overseeing the newspaper, the website, book projects. We were doing a new book at that time, Our Dumb World, and I was overseeing the videos. And so I injected myself at critical moments. I would choose the idea that would be pursued, and then I would look at the rough draft of the script to make sure it was on the right track. And I would look at the final draft of the script to make sure that was on the right track. And then sometimes I would direct the videos, and sometimes I would just have a long conversation with the director. Will Graham was our producer who directed most of those videos beforehand, to tell him, like, here's what kind of coverage you should get. Here's a way to trick actors into seeming really real, because it was really important that the acting come off as totally real. And I'm talking about the actualities, not the news anchors, because that's kind of a different beast. And then I would look at the edits, and Will was an excellent director. He would have amazing coverage. And we'd do alternates. So every script would be like 2 extra pages of alternate jokes, so that every take, if it didn't work, it'd be like, well, let's see if we got a different joke. And then one time I was watching a video edit, and we had an alternate take of a joke that was a better joke, but the read wasn't great. I said, it'd be great if he emphasized that word instead of that word. It'd be funnier. It was like, I got that. Like, that's how good Will was. He had such coverage. Like, he just covered all his bases. And got so many different takes of so many different jokes that you could always find something that was just gold. And then another trick we did, this is a real in the weeds trick, was for an actuality, like an interview with somebody on the street on a news piece, give them a few words that don't matter, that are after the punchline. Like create a fake end of sentence, because what'll happen then is you'll cut it on the joke, but it'll sound like they kept talking, and it'll make it seem so much more real, like a real news clip.
Wow.
Because when people do comedy, typically actors, even when they're great, they're gonna gin up a little like pizzazz for a punchline. They're gonna read it like this, and that's gonna be terrible in news actuality. So that was there were many little tricks we used like that. And another trick was hiring non-actors and just asking them questions and trying to lead them into answering it with the joke, so that worked, because the whole point was like, how can you get them to not act?
That is so smart. So you trick the actors into delivering
the
it,
lines properly. Yeah.
That is so funny.
You do whatever you can. So anyway, so I'm overseeing all this stuff, and I'm trying to inject myself where I can have the most impact. And so that was my way of like preventing a situation where at the end of the process, I see a video and I'm like, why did you make that video? That's a terrible idea. No, I was involved in the beginning. So I was okaying it every step of the way. So there really wouldn't ever be a situation where, this video is terrible, let's cut the whole thing. It was always like, oh no, we can tweak it and make it work, because we know fundamentally it's good.
Right. Yeah, that seems like an interesting way to or that's like basically a fail safe, so you don't over invest in something and then realize it's crap.
Yep.
Yeah. And there's a for like topical versus evergreen content, was there like a good ratio? Like what was the ratio of topical to evergreen?
Up until about 2012, everything in the Onion was pretty much evergreen. It was very rare that we would do a story that was timely, because our lead time was about 2 weeks from the point that we thought up an idea to the point where it was finished and we put it out there, about 2 weeks. So we couldn't respond to news stories that were happening in the 24-hour news cycle. It just wasn't possible. Mm-hmm. And then around 2012, we decided, okay, people want us to respond to the news. Like that's what they expect us to do. That's what they think we're doing, even though we're not. And so we changed the whole thing. We moved away from being a print-focused organization to being a web-focused organization. And we started responding to stories that were happening in the news. We truncated our process so that we could basically crank out a quick story like in a day or two. And that's when the Onion became a little bit more like the Daily Show, in that it would take real news and comment on it. Before that, all we ever did at the Onion was just make up fake stories that had nothing to do with what was happening in the real news. And it was a little shift, but it actually had a big impact, because again, people thought that's what we did anyway. They expected that. There'd be a big news story that would happen and people would say, oh, I can't wait to see how you're going to handle this at the Onion. And I'm like, do you not know what we do? We don't respond to the news. We just make up news that has nothing to do with what's going on. So we kind of like fooled people into thinking that we were actually responding to current events for, almost 30 years. And then when we finally did, our readership did increase quite a bit.
Yeah. I imagine
actually doing topical humor.
Yeah. I would imagine so, because that's just, I think or at least in my experience, the market for topical comedy just seems to be larger than an evergreen.
That's what everybody wants. They have an insatiable appetite for relevance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Kind of shifting gears a little bit. I'm wondering what your opinion is on. I'll tell you my opinion on these media companies that syndicate comedy and then distribute them, like Barstool Sports is one of them. Any infinite number of meme pages where they they pick up the best memes and then they post them, and then they're well known for being like a curator. I am disgusted by these entities. I hate them because I don't think there's skill in curating content. That's my honest opinion, but I'm wondering, what do you think?
I don't hate them that much. I think it's okay as long as they're passing on some kind of credit to the people who create the work that they're curating. I don't have any problem with it. Because that's what you need on the internet. Otherwise, you're just out there searching this vast wasteland for something interesting. You got to find curators that you trust, that you can follow, that hopefully concentrate the work and save you time.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it now. I'm probably just biased because like I want to get on those pages and I don't, and they don't. I'm not there yet. But that's an interesting opinion on it. I think that. Well, I just sort of see them as an unnecessary middleman. Like, if I want the Onion's comedy, I'm going to go to theonion.com. I don't want to go
That's
to.
what I mean. They should be scouring the Netherlands of the internet to find stuff that's funny, that nobody else is going to discover. I don't think they're doing anybody any favors by featuring really popular, name brand sources of humor on their page. That's silly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a good point. I think there's a few.
Yeah, Huffington Post does that a lot, where they'll feature stuff that's already on a really popular site. It's just like glad handing between the super popular. It's like, don't, how is that helping anybody? Like, find the hard to find stuff and help us find that. That's what I want from a curator.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. There's a reason they exist, I suppose. Yeah. So, and I was who were your comedic inspirations? Who like?
I liked Steve Martin coming up. I liked David Letterman. Andy Kaufman was a big one. Woody Allen. But so Mad Magazine was a big influence on me too, definitely. But the thing that inspired me most really in the early years was comedy that wasn't funny. That really lit a fire under me, because it made me feel like, well, if they can do it and it sucks, like, well, I can do better than that. And that really like jazzed me up. So when Steve Martin wrote his first book, Cruel Shoes, I didn't think it was very funny. And that really inspired me, because I thought, well, he's really funny, and I bet you I could write a funnier book than him. So I'm totally doing this,
I love that attitude. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I don't know how long you have, Scott. I have infinite questions. But I want to be respectful of your time as well.
All right. Why don't you do a couple more from your list from viewers?
Okay.
And
let's see here. So here's one from one of my friends, listeners. Was there ever a and I guess we touched on this a little bit, but this is just this verbatim. What was the purpose of the Onion ever? Is the purpose of the Onion purely comedic, or was there ever a political angle to the Onion?
Purely comedic.
That makes sense, and I guess that's absolutely. This is actually one that let's see here. I have one. This is actually just one that I have, which was that I thought of previously. What did the process for creating an Onion article, like what from start to finish, did that evolve over time? And and you mentioned it's about 2 weeks from start to finish. What's sort of the process for that?
Yeah, it has changed a little bit. In the early days, you couldn't really rely on a quality first draft from a writer. It'd be a real half-assed effort, and so the editor would have to rewrite it and do most of the work themselves. So we got a writer around 2006, I want to say, by the name of Mike DeCenzo, who totally raised that bar, and he would turn in rough drafts that were almost like completed articles that you could run. Didn't need a lot of work. And all the other writers who had been there for years and years and years were totally shamed by this young writer. And they were like, oh, okay, now there's a standard. and they couldn't produce half-assed work anymore. They were expected to produce really high quality first drafts. And so that meant less work for the editor. So yeah, what would happen was the process would be you'd come up with a bunch of headline ideas, you'd pick your best headline ideas, then you'd assign those out as stories. You get a first draft back, and in the early days, the first draft would be terrible. The editor would figure, you know what, it's too much work and too much trouble to like deal with the writer and try to get this to work. I'm just going to rewrite it. Just going to do it from scratch, or maybe borrow some elements from their draft. But then after Mike DeCenzo era, and he went on to be a writer for Jimmy Fallon's show. I think he's still there. And actually, I think he left. Not sure what he's doing now. But super, super talented, wonderful, skilled guy. After Mike DeCenzo, you would get a pretty decent first draft from the writer. You'd read that at the writer's meeting. Everybody would give their notes. And sometimes you'd go back to that same writer for a second draft if it needs a lot of work. But if it's pretty close, the editor would just take it and try to incorporate any of the notes that came out of the meeting and give it one more look from the writers to do any punch up or whatever, and then it would be good to run.
Yeah, that's
basically the process.
Fast. That's real fast.
Yeah, no, and you can speed that up if you have a timely thing. You can come up with the idea in the morning, write the story in the afternoon, and publish it at night.
Yeah, those are the ones that are just like, I mean, those are the ones you want to rush, right? That's just like,
yeah,
those are the late night. Was there ever a time when something came out in like midday that you just gotta go on?
There was a time when we literally had to stop the presses to get a story in because a news event happened that we had a joke that we had in our back pockets that we couldn't wait to run. And it was when a famous person died. So this famous person died and we really wanted to run this joke, but it was back when we were doing things on the print schedule. So we would have had to wait a week for the next issue to run this joke. We're like, nope, can't do it. So we called the printing press and we're like, stop the presses. We're replacing the front page. And we put one of these little, what we called skyboxes, a little box with just a headline and a picture. And it was, say people aren't even going to understand or remember this joke, but Charlton Heston, actor who was in The Planet of the Apes, 10 Commandments, big right winger. He was the head of the NRA in his later years. And his famous catchphrase was he would hold up a rifle and he would say, "From my cold dead hands." And so the headline that we couldn't wait to run after he died was "Rifle taken from Charlton Heston's cold dead hands." And so that was one where we had to rush that one at the last second.
That's so funny. Oh my God. That's wild. Yeah, that's the top. I mean, and now it's just as easy as digital. It's just you can just do it.
Just
quicker.
Upload a new one. Easy.
Yeah. And I guess my last question. This is also one that I had, but what from your perspective, what do you think that the legacy of the Onion is, and will be, is?
Yeah, interesting question. I feel like I would love to look back and say, oh, it made a difference. Like it encouraged critical thinking. And maybe for some people it did, but I look at where the world has gone and how so many people like don't believe in science and, are happily joining this cult of personality and careening the US straight into fascism, like willingly and happily. Then I feel like, well, the Onion's been totally worthless. Like, what's the point? Because if satire is going to do anything, and again, the whole point is to be funny, but in addition to being funny, you have this subtextual message that you're trying to get out. And the message that we're always trying to get out at the Onion was, don't believe everything you read, be skeptical, be reasonable, be decent. Those are kind of like the general subtextual messages we're sending out.
Mm-hmm.
And, I look back and I realize, well, you know what? Human beings are human beings, and they're going to be terrible and they're going to be stupid and they're going to be awful no matter what you do. So hopefully the legacy is just like people remember having a good laugh or two, but I don't think it's any like grander than that,
Yeah. I think that, no, I mean, it's, even when you look back, that's interesting because even when you look back at any sort of work of, or any I don't even know how to describe it. Any content from thousands of years ago, or like the Bible, right?
Right.
You know, I mean,
they're trying to make the Bible, like it's trying to tell stories that are going to make people behave. You know, they're going to make people not want to murder each other or whatever. Have we stopped murdering people? No, we haven't. The
right.
Bible's 2,000 years old. We still haven't stopped murdering people. So, yeah, literature doesn't work. It's a take-home message. It doesn't work. There's no point. It's like a momentary diversion for people to feel good for a second. That's about it.
Yeah. Well, if there's any
change the world.
I mean, you know, but that, I think there's definitely value in that, you know, spreading joy to people's lives is.
Yeah, no, it's a delightful, wonderful little thing. It's better than, you know, you're leaving the world a little bit better than how you found it. Not much, but the best you can, you know, it's the best you can hope for.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot better than I think a lot of people. So, you know, most people are on the other.
Yeah, they're making it worse. Yeah, they're making it worse.
Yeah. Well, that's all the questions I had, Scott.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Sean.
Yeah, I really, I can't thank you enough for being on my show. It's, you know, it's a very great honor. And I thank you for, your time. You're very, very generous, and I appreciate that. And, yeah, and I'd love to sign off, but if you want to, I know you have a lot of stuff to plug, so feel free to talk about that if you're,
yeah, people can find me online on Twitter. I'm at Scott Dikkers. That's 2 Ks, no C. On Instagram, it's Scott Dikkers, because some jackass took Scott Dikkers. I'm not sure who that is. And my website is howtowritefunny.com, where people can learn how to write comedy. I have a lot of free ebooks there. My podcast, the How to Write Funny podcast, is on there. And I have courses on how to learn comedy. And my books are all on Amazon. I lately have been self-publishing books on Amazon, like my How to Write Funny series, and my first novel, The Joke at the End of the World, just came out yesterday. Pretty excited about that.
Oh, congrats. Great.
Thank you.
Good timing.
Yeah. No, it's pretty sweet. And yeah, so I hope to hear from people.
Great. Well, I'll put the links to all that stuff in the description of the video.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And thanks a lot, Scott. Appreciate your time. And thank you everyone for listening. And we'll see you next time.
People talk loud.